The day humans first walked on the moon, the race that changed the world. Imagine standing outside on a quiet night, you look up, far above you, the moon hangs silently in the darkness. It has always been there, watching over generations. Kings and queens looked at it, ancient explorers sailed beneath its light, children pointed at it in wonder. For thousands of years, people asked the same question: what is it really like? Up there, could a human ever reach it, or would the moon remain forever beyond our grasp, for centuries? No one knew the answer. Then, in the 20th century, the impossible slowly began to look possible. On July 20, 1969, the entire world stopped to watch. Families gathered around television sets, schools paused their lessons, factories, offices, and homes all turned their attention to a single event. 3 astronauts were about to attempt the greatest journey in human history. If they succeeded, humanity would take its first steps on another world. If they failed, the tragedy would unfold before millions of people watching live. But stories like this don't begin with heroes. They begin with a challenge, and this challenge started more than a decade earlier, not on the moon, but here on Earth. Chapter 1. When the world entered the space race, the year was 1957, the world was already living with uncertainty. Only a few years had passed since the end of the Second World War. Although the fighting had ended, a new rivalry had begun. On one side stood the United States. On the other stood the Soviet Union. Both nations possessed powerful armies, both wanted to prove they had the greatest technology, the greatest scientists, the greatest future. This rivalry became known as the Cold War. Despite its name, it was far from peaceful. The two countries competed in politics, military power, scientific discoveries, and soon, space. At first, many people believed space exploration was nothing more than a dream. After all, no human had ever left Earth. Even placing an object into orbit sounded impossible. But on October 4, 1957, everything changed. The Soviet Union launched Sputnik 1. It was the first artificial satellite ever placed into orbit around Earth. By today's standards, Sputnik was surprisingly small. It measured just over half a meter across and weighed about 84 kilograms. It carried no astronauts, no cameras, no scientific laboratory, only a simple radio transmitter. Yet that tiny spacecraft changed history forever. As Sputnik circled the Earth every 96 minutes, it sent out a steady signal. Beep, beep, beep. Radio operators around the world could hear it. To many listeners, it sounded like nothing more than an electronic pulse. But to governments, it sounded like the beginning of a new era. If the Soviet Union could launch a satellite into orbit, it meant they had developed rockets powerful enough to leave Earth's atmosphere. Many Americans wondered, if such rockets could carry satellites, could they also carry weapons across continents? Fear spread quickly. Newspapers described the launch as one of the biggest technological surprises of the century. Many people believed America had fallen behind. Parents worried about the future. Teachers began encouraging students to study mathematics and science more seriously. Universities expanded engineering programs. The United States realized something had to change. This wasn't just about reaching space anymore. It was about national pride, national security, and proving to the world that America could compete. Without realizing it, Sputnik had started one of the greatest competitions in human history. The space race. And this was only the beginning. Chapter 2. The world watches another shocking first. Just when the United States began reorganizing its space program, the Soviet Union struck again. Less than 4 years after Sputnik, they prepared for an even more daring mission. This time, the passenger wouldn't be a machine, it would be a human being. Scientists had spent years asking difficult questions. Could the human body survive the violent force of a rocket launch? Could a person breathe and think clearly in the weightlessness of space? Would the heart function normally? Or would space itself prove too dangerous for human life? There was only one way to find out. A brave volunteer would have to go first. His name was Yuri Gagarin, and neither he nor the rest of the world knew that his flight was about to change history forever. The world held its breath. On April 12, 1961, a 27-year-old Soviet Air Force pilot named Yuri Gagarin climbed into a tiny spacecraft called Vostok 1. It was unlike anything the world had ever seen. The capsule was extremely small. There was barely enough room for Gagarin to move. Once the hatch was sealed, there was no turning back. No one knew exactly what would happen.
Shows anomalies.
Scientists had studied the effects of high-speed flight, but no human had ever experienced space. Would weightlessness affect the human brain? Would the heart continue beating normally? Would fear overwhelm the astronaut? No one could answer those questions with certainty. At 9:07 in the morning, Moscow time, the engines roared to life, flames burst beneath the rocket. Slowly, the rocket lifted from the launch pad. Within seconds, it accelerated through the clouds. The world had entered a new chapter in history. As the rocket climbed higher and higher, Earth slowly disappeared beneath him. For the first time in history, a human being was looking down on our planet from space. The journey lasted just 108 minutes, but those 108 minutes changed the world forever. When Gagarin safely returned to Earth, he instantly became an international hero. Crowds gathered to celebrate. Newspapers across the globe printed his photograph on their front pages. The Soviet Union had once again achieved something no other nation had done. For the United States, it was another painful reminder. America was still behind. Its greatest rival had launched the first satellite, and now, the first human into space. Many people wondered, would the Soviet Union also become the first to reach the moon? Chapter 3, Kennedy's Bold Challenge. Only a few weeks after Yuri Gagarin's historic flight, the pressure on the United States had become enormous. The country needed hope. It needed a goal that would inspire millions of people. On May 25, 1961, President John F. Kennedy stood before the United States Congress. His message was simple, but incredibly ambitious. America, he said, would land a man on the moon, and return him safely to Earth. Before the decade was over, many people couldn't believe what they had just heard. At that time, America had not even sent a human to orbit the Earth successfully. Landing on the moon seemed impossible. Some scientists believed it could take decades, others questioned whether it could ever be done. The project would cost billions of dollars. It would require thousands of scientists, engineers, technicians, factory workers, mathematicians, pilots, and astronauts. It would also require solving problems that had never been solved before. How do you guide a spacecraft nearly 400,000 kilometers through space? How do you land safely on a surface no human has ever touched? How do you lift off from the moon and return home? These were questions with no existing answers. Everything had to be invented, everything had to be tested, and every mistake could cost lives. Still, Kennedy believed that difficult goals brought out the very best in people. His speech transformed the impossible into a national mission. Across America, young students dreamed of becoming astronauts. Universities expanded engineering and science programs. Factories began producing new spacecraft. Entire teams worked day and night. The journey to the moon had officially begun. Chapter 4, Learning Before the Giant Leap. NASA understood one important truth. No one could simply climb into a spacecraft and fly to the moon. The journey had to be learned. Step by step, the Mercury program taught astronauts the basics of surviving in space. The Gemini program pushed those limits even further. Astronauts learned how to stay in orbit for days instead of hours. They practiced spacewalks outside their spacecraft. They mastered the difficult skill of docking two spacecraft together, a technique that would later become essential for reaching the moon. Each mission uncovered new challenges. Sometimes equipment failed, sometimes missions had to change. NASA's engineers carefully studied every success and every mistake. One of the darkest moments came in 1967, during a ground test for Apollo 1, a fire broke out inside the spacecraft. 3 astronauts lost their lives. The tragedy shocked the nation. NASA paused, investigated every detail, redesigned the spacecraft to make it safer. The loss was heartbreaking, but it strengthened the team's determination. They would honor those astronauts by making future missions safer. Over the next 2 years, mission after mission proved that the dream was getting closer. The rockets became more reliable, the spacecraft became stronger, the astronauts became more experienced. Finally, the moment the world had been waiting for arrived. 3 astronauts were chosen for a mission called Apollo 11. Their names were Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins. Together, they were about to attempt the most dangerous journey in human history. Standing on the launch pad before them was the mighty Saturn V rocket, more than 110 meters tall, powerful enough to shake the ground beneath it, powerful enough to carry human beings to another world. But would it work? Would the astronauts survive the launch, and if they reached the moon, would they ever make it back home? We'll begin that incredible journey in part 2.